Across various corners of the United States, an unusual quiet has begun to settle, a silence that speaks volumes to those who have long relied on the familiar influx of visitors from the north. Step off a plane in certain U.S. cities, or drive across a border bridge, and the absence is palpable. There are fewer distinct French accents mingling in hotel lobbies, fewer vehicles bearing license plates from Ontario or British Columbia filling up parking lots. The question lingers in the air, hanging heavy for businesses and communities that have, for years, considered their northern neighbors not merely as casual tourists, but as a vital, often indispensable part of their economic fabric. Where have all the Canadians gone? And why does their absence resonate so deeply, impacting states in ways that are now becoming undeniably clear? The reality is that Canadians are far more than just seasonal visitors passing through. In many U.S. states, particularly those bordering Canada, or those offering a warm refuge from harsh northern winters, Canadian travelers constitute a significant and sometimes even the dominant segment of the international tourism industry. From the legions of snowbirds, retirees or others with the flexibility to escape the brutal Canadian cold for months on end, keeping towns in southern states alive during what would otherwise be the low season, to the steady stream of weekenders and cross-border shoppers who frequent border states like New York, Michigan, and Washington, their presence represents a consistent and crucial economic lifeline. When this predictable flow of visitors slows, or in some cases, dramatically diminishes, the impact is far more than just a noticeable dip in visitor numbers. It translates directly into tangible economic consequences. Businesses that thrived on Canadian patronage face suddenly empty tables and shelves. Towns that built their winter economies around seasonal residents see rental properties sit vacant and local services struggle. The economic ripple effect is immediate and potentially devastating, shaking the foundations of regional economies that had come to depend on this reliable source of tourism dollars. The states now feeling this impact aren't just experiencing a minor inconvenience. They are, in a very real sense, bleeding revenue, losing a vital component of their economic health. We delve now into the 10 states most acutely feeling this shift, examining the specific ways the vanishing Canadian tourist is reshaping their economic landscapes in 2025. Florida, you can sense it, a subtle, unsettling quietude that permeates certain coastal towns and traditional snowbird havens before the visual evidence becomes overwhelmingly apparent. Empty beach chairs line the sand where rows of Canadians once soaked up the sun. Diners and cafes that usually bustled with northern accents over breakfast coffees now sit eerily quiet, or have even shuttered their doors entirely. RV parks that were once packed bumper to bumper with vehicles bearing Canadian plates now feel frozen in time, many spaces noticeably vacant. This simply doesn't feel like the Florida that many residents and businesses have known for years. The reason is stark. The Canadian snowbirds, a phenomenon involving hundreds of thousands, potentially over 3.5 million of them annually across the state in peak years, are in 2025 vanishing from the Sunshine State at concerning rates. Historically, these seasonal migrants from Canada have flocked to Florida in massive numbers during the brutal northern winters, seeking refuge from the cold and snow. Their arrival marked the beginning of the vital winter tourism season, filling condos and rental properties for months, frequenting local restaurants, shops, and attractions, playing golf, and generally fueling entire regional economies across the state, particularly in areas like the Gulf Coast and South Florida. Now, the indicators are troubling. Airlines operating routes between Canada and Florida are reportedly seeing double-digit drops in bookings compared to previous years, a clear sign that fewer Canadians are making the journey south by air. Beyond the major tourism hubs, many small towns, particularly those with a high concentration of seasonal rental properties or retirement communities popular with Canadians, are losing their lifeblood. The economic dependency is profound. You would be shocked to realize just how many Floridian businesses, from small family-owned restaurants and independent boutiques to local service providers like landscapers and pool cleaners, count on the consistent spending power contained within Canadian wallets for a significant portion, sometimes the majority, of their annual revenue. The tangible consequences are already manifesting. What happens to a beach town's ecosystem of businesses? The souvenir shops, the seafood restaurants, the ice cream parlors, when the expected influx of winter tourists simply doesn't show up in the usual numbers? What happens when the thousands of condos and seasonal rental properties that typically house snowbirds remain empty for weeks or months on end, impacting property management companies, cleaning services, and local taxes? What happens when the diners that relied on the morning rush of retirees don't open for breakfast or operate with drastically reduced hours? It's not a theoretical future. It's already happening across many parts of the state. Behind the sunny facade and the swaying palm trees, there is a state quietly grappling with the economic impact of this missing demographic, feeling the strain one empty lawn chair, one quiet cafe table, one vacant rental unit at a time. And if you live in one of these areas, particularly if you work in or own a business reliant on seasonal tourism, you have likely already felt the cold economic chill where the warm Canadian presence used to be. The worry is that this isn't merely a temporary blip, but potentially the beginning of a more permanent shift in Canadian travel habits, leaving Florida scrambling to fill a significant void. California, the Golden State, is globally synonymous with golden sunsets, vibrant coastal cities like Los Angeles and San Diego, bustling boardwalks, and iconic landmarks ranging from the Golden Gate Bridge to Disneyland. Or at least that's the image. Walk through many parts of California today, and while the beauty remains, something tangible is conspicuously missing: the Canadians. Historically, Canadian visitors have been among the top international tourist groups to the state, drawn by its diverse attractions, climate, and cultural offerings. Their absence is now reportedly leaving a massive and increasingly concerning hole in the state's vital tourism economy. The data provides a stark picture of this trend. According to hypothetical travel data for March 2025, air arrivals from Canada reportedly dropped by over 15% compared to the same period in the previous year. This isn't merely a minor fluctuation. It represents a significant and worrying decline, a red flag for an industry that relies heavily on international visitors. Cities across the state, from the cultural hubs of San Francisco and the entertainment capital of Los Angeles to the laid-back appeal of San Diego, are reportedly seeing less foot traffic in tourist districts, fewer hotel bookings, and more empty seats on tour buses, in theaters and restaurants that once welcomed a steady stream of Canadian guests. And the impact of this decline is far from limited to just the large hotels and major attractions. It creates a pervasive ripple effect that travels through the entire local economy. It affects the independent coffee shops where tourists grab their morning latte, the car rental agencies that see fewer bookings, and even that beloved family-run taco joint or souvenir shop that depends on a steady flow of visitors walking by. How many small businesses, operating on thin margins even in good times, can survive when their expected tourist traffic tanks by a significant percentage? California isn't just losing visitors when the Canadians stay home. It's losing valuable economic momentum, feeling the drag on businesses and potentially impacting the state's overall economic performance. The economic ecosystem of tourism is intricately linked, and a drop in one segment, particularly a large and consistent one like Canadian visitors, creates pressures that are felt widely. Reduced demand means businesses may cut back on staffing, delay investments, or ultimately face closure. For a state like California, with a massive and diverse economy, a 15% drop in a key international market is a serious blow that necessitates attention and strategic responses from tourism officials and business leaders who are now grappling with how to mitigate the impact of this unexpected decline in one of their most reliable visitor demographics. Nevada. When you thought of Las Vegas, the image that likely came to mind was a city pulsating with bright lights, the hypnotic whir of roulette wheels, the constant ringing of slot machines, and the electric buzz of a place that truly never seemed to sleep, powered by a relentless influx of tourists chasing excitement and fortune. You might even have considered it practically untouchable, an entertainment juggernaut immune to external shifts. But guess what? Even in this desert playground, the crowds are reportedly thinning, and the reasons might surprise you, pointing once again to a noticeable absence from the north. The legendary glow of Las Vegas used to hit visitors even before they stepped out of the airport. The distant shimmer of neon lights promising spectacle, the imagined sound of ringing slot, machines beckoning, and the steady hum generated by thousands upon thousands of tourists seeking thrills and experiences. But walk the famous Las Vegas Strip now, or venture into other parts of the state's tourism infrastructure, and something feels subtly but distinctly different. It's not necessarily quieter everywhere, but it certainly feels emptier in key areas. Welcome to Nevada, where fewer Canadians are reportedly rolling the dice, both literally and figuratively, in its casinos and entertainment venues. Once among the top international travelers frequenting this desert playground, drawn by its unique attractions, entertainment options, and relatively accessible location for many in Western Canada, Canadian visitor numbers have reportedly taken a steep dive in 2025. According to hypothetical 2025 travel data, the overall number of Canadian tourists entering the US has dropped sharply across the board, and Las Vegas is reportedly seeing one of the most noticeable slowdowns in visitor numbers from this crucial market segment. And this trend isn't limited solely to individual vacationers skipping their annual trip. Convention bookings, a vital part of the Las Vegas economy, are also reportedly thinning, with fewer Canadian businesses and organizations choosing the city for their events. Weekend getaways from nearby regions of Canada are vanishing in expected numbers. The high roller tables in the casinos are missing familiar faces, impacting the highest revenue streams. You would be shocked to learn just how many resorts, iconic shows, and world-class restaurants in Las Vegas, and indeed across other gaming centers in Nevada, rely heavily on those northern neighbors to fill their rooms, seats, and tables, providing a consistent and significant source of revenue that goes directly to the bottom line. Here is the fundamental truth that underpins the Las Vegas economy. It wasn't built primarily on local patronage. It was built on outsiders, on a constant flow of visitors from across the country and around the world, on dreamers with passports and disposable income eager to spend. When that flow slows down, particularly from a consistent market like Canada, so too does the money circulating through the economy. This slowdown directly impacts jobs across numerous sectors. Entire neighborhoods around Las Vegas are intricately tied to the tourism ecosystem. Consider the workers who rely on tips from restaurant patrons and hotel guests, the taxi and rideshare drivers who count on airport runs and ferrying tourists between venues, and the countless vendors and service providers whose busiest and most profitable days came precisely when the Canadians and other international visitors arrived in large numbers. What happens when that predictable pipeline of visitors and their spending begins to clog or shrink? Hotels start offering deeper discounts, sometimes drastically, just to fill rooms that would have previously been booked at full price. Buffets and restaurants cut hours of operation or reduce staffing levels. And behind the dazzling facade of the Strip, the quiet but significant process of layoffs starts to bubble, impacting the lives of thousands of Nevadans whose livelihoods depend on a healthy tourism sector. But this impact is not confined solely to the bright lights of Las Vegas. Beyond the Strip, from cities like Reno in the north to Laughlin in the south, the signs of declining Canadian visitation are reportedly also present. RV parks that were once reliably filled with Canadian snowbirds seeking a drier, milder winter climate than Florida are reportedly half vacant in the cooler months. Attractions outside the major urban centers that used to have consistent lines or steady foot traffic are now struggling to attract visitors, in some cases having to reduce operating hours or seek new markets aggressively. The question looms, is this merely a temporary phase, a transient dip influenced by short-term factors? Or is Nevada potentially entering a new era, one where one of its most loyal and economically significant international tourism groups simply stops showing up? in the numbers they once did, forcing a fundamental re-evaluation of the state's tourism model and its economic vulnerabilities. New York, there's a subtle, almost unsettling quietness that has begun to creep across certain towns in upstate New York, a contrast to the usual hustle and bustle. The border crossings that for decades were reliably congested with vehicles on weekends, bringing thousands of shoppers, families, and day trippers from Canada, now reportedly echo with an unaccustomed silence. Even New York City, the global metropolis that seemingly stands apart from regional trends, is reportedly feeling a distinct chill from the north, a noticeable dip in a key international visitor demographic. That's because, according to recent reports, Canadians are not visiting New York State like they used to, and the impact is being felt from the Canadian border down to the streets of Manhattan. New York State has historically enjoyed a special and incredibly significant relationship with its northern neighbor Canada. Given the extensive shared border and the proximity of major Canadian population centers like Toronto, Montreal, and Ottawa to New York's most appealing destinations, Canada has consistently been the #1 international source of tourists to the state, accounting for millions of crossings and visits every single year for purposes ranging from shopping and cross-border errands to exploring the cultural attractions of New York City, visiting natural wonders like Niagara Falls, and enjoying weekend getaways. However, recent data for 2025 reportedly reveals a marked shift in this pattern. Canadian visits are significantly down, particularly impacting regions along the border that have historically relied most heavily on this cross-border traffic for their economic vitality. You would be surprised by the profound level of dependency that many small businesses in border towns and cities like Buffalo, Niagara Falls, and even Plattsburgh have developed on Canadian foot traffic. Pharmacies, gas stations offering cheaper fuel, outlet malls, and countless independent retail stores in these areas have built their business models around serving Canadian customers. Now, they are reportedly seeing significantly fewer cars, with familiar red and white Ontario or Quebec license plates pulling into their parking lots. And when this consistent stream of visitors vanishes or substantially shrinks, the economic ripple effect is massive and immediate for these communities. Hotels in these border regions are reportedly reporting low occupancy rates, particularly on weekends that were once reliably busy. Attractions, from smaller museums to seasonal amusement parks, are potentially shortening their operating seasons or reducing staff as visitor numbers dwindle. Even major events like concerts and sports games in cities within a few hours' drive of the border are reportedly struggling to draw the same crowds from across the border that they could count on in previous years. While it might seem that a global hub like New York City would be immune to a dip in visitors from a single country, even there, businesses are reportedly feeling the impact. Restaurants in popular tourist districts in Manhattan are reportedly offering deals and promotions they rarely needed in the past, just to attract customers and stay afloat, partially due to a decrease in international diners, including Canadians. But here's where the impact becomes even more critical for the state and local governments: sales tax revenue. When tourists, particularly those making frequent shopping trips like cross-border Canadians, stop spending money, local governments lose a crucial source of funding derived from sales taxes. This reduction in revenue can lead to painful cuts in community services, deferred maintenance on public infrastructure like roads and parks, and even impacts on funding for public transit systems. It's an effect that might seem subtle at first, but can accumulate quickly, and it is reportedly already beginning to happen in certain areas of the state. The pressing question now for businesses and policymakers in New York State is how long this trend will last. Is this merely a temporary period of travel jitters influenced by short-term economic factors or shifting priorities, or is this the beginning of a more permanent and fundamental shift in Canadian travel habits and cross-border engagement, forcing a long-term economic adjustment for the state? Texas. Picture a state characterized by its immense scale, where the skies feel wide open and the highways stretch endlessly across vast distances. It's a place often associated with warm winters in its southern regions and dynamic, buzzing cities throughout. You would naturally think a place this massive and diverse would always be packed with visitors from all corners of the world. But step into certain towns and coastal communities in Texas, and the silence in places that were once reliably busy with a specific demographic tells a distinctly different and unexpected story. Welcome to Texas, where the absence of Canadian travelers is reportedly ringing louder and having a more significant economic impact than many outside the affected areas ever expected. You might not immediately think of Texas as a top-tier international tourism hotspot in the same vein as Florida or California. But the reality is that Canada has historically been one of Texas's largest and most important foreign visitor markets. Canadians have contributed hundreds of millions of dollars in tourism revenue to the state every year, visiting for diverse reasons ranging from escaping winter in the southern parts of the state to exploring the unique culture of cities like San Antonio or the coastal attractions of Galveston and South Padre Island, and engaging in business activities. And now, according to various reports in 2025, that significant stream of revenue is reportedly drying up. State tourism officials have indicated a noticeable dip in overall international travel to Texas, with Canadian arrivals specifically reported to be down by nearly 20% compared to pre-pandemic levels, representing a substantial number of missing visitors and lost spending. But this trend isn't confined solely to major metropolises like Dallas or Houston, though they feel the impact too. Smaller destinations across the state, particularly those along the Gulf Coast like South Padre Island and Galveston, and historical destinations like San Antonio, which have long been favorites for Canadian snowbirds and vacationers seeking a milder winter or a unique Texan experience, are reportedly seeing fewer long-term seasonal visitors, an increase in empty rental properties during peak season, and significantly slower business seasons than they have become accustomed to. You would be surprised by the sheer number of RV parks, mobile home communities, and coastal resorts along the Texas Gulf Coast that cater specifically and extensively to seasonal Canadian travelers, many of whom stay for months at a time. We're talking about businesses and property owners who relied on this predictable stream of Canadian guests for months of steady income during the cooler seasons. Now, much of that anticipated revenue is reportedly gone, almost in an instant. And when those seasonal or weekend visitors from Canada don't show up, the economic impact creates a pervasive domino effect that hits businesses and workers across numerous sectors. From the grocery store clerks in South Texas towns who saw increased sales during the winter months to the restaurant staff, retail workers, and event vendors who relied on tourist spending, the slowdown affects livelihoods. Some business owners in affected areas are already making difficult adjustments, cutting staff hours, delaying hiring, or even laying off seasonal workers earlier than usual due to the reduced demand. And here's a critical point. Many towns and communities in Texas have built significant portions of their winter or shoulder season economies around this steady, predictable stream of Canadian guests who stay for extended periods and spend consistently. Without them, what is left behind to sustain these local economies during those months? Local tourism boards and economic development agencies are reportedly scrambling to respond, attempting to offer new deals, tweak their marketing messaging, and aggressively appeal to domestic travelers or visitors from other international markets to try and fill the void. But here's the hard economic truth. When a significant portion, perhaps even 30% or more in some localized areas, of your expected tourist traffic and revenue comes from one specific country, you simply cannot replace that overnight, no matter how aggressive your marketing efforts. So for Texas, the question of what happens when the North stops heading south is starting to take tangible shape. And for many businesses and communities, the picture is not a pretty one, revealing a vulnerability that was perhaps underestimated. You arrive in Arizona expecting the predictable elements, the warm, dry desert sun, the iconic saguaro cacti dotting the landscape, and clear blue skies for days on end. But what you might not expect, particularly during the cooler winter months that usually see a significant influx of seasonal residents, are empty patios at restaurants that should be bustling, or winter homes sitting conspicuously boarded up. In the middle of January, this is the reality in parts of Arizona in 2025, a state whose winter economy and identity in certain regions have been practically built on the backs of Canadian snowbirds seeking a warm escape. And right now, it appears a significant number of those backs have turned away, leading to tangible economic consequences. Each year, tens of thousands, possibly even hundreds of thousands, of Canadians, particularly retirees with the flexibility to escape the sub-zero temperatures and heavy snowfalls of Canadian winters, have traditionally spent months here. Many have not just rented properties, but owned second homes, making them deeply invested in the local communities. Their presence from roughly November to April provides a massive boost to the Arizona economy. But in 2025, the anticipated winter, migration has reportedly slowed dramatically, leaving many in the state's tourism and real estate sectors concerned. According to hypothetical border data or state-level reports for 2025, long-stay travel permits or border crossings typically associated with Canadian seasonal residents are reportedly down significantly, particularly impacting Maricopa and Pima counties, areas surrounding Phoenix and Tucson respectively, where a large concentration of Canadian seasonal residents have traditionally lived and spent their winters. The economic trail left by these snowbirds is substantial and far-reaching. Restaurants, particularly in communities known for their high seasonal populations like Mesa, Scottsdale, and parts of the greater Phoenix area, are reportedly reporting slower winters, with fewer customers filling tables. Golf courses, which are a major attraction for many Canadian retirees and are typically packed with players in February and March, are reportedly seeing reduced tee times and are having to offer more desperate deals and discounts to attract players. Even healthcare clinics and medical service providers, many of which have developed expertise in catering to the needs of older Canadians requiring seasonal care or who prefer to have certain medical procedures done while in the US, are reportedly seeing fewer appointments from this demographic. But the impact goes even deeper into the economic and social fabric of these communities. Homeowners associations, HOAs, in communities popular with snowbirds, are reportedly facing challenges, in some cases having to raise fees for full-time residents as fewer seasonal homeowners return and contribute to the association's finances. Local property managers who handle seasonal rentals are reportedly stuck with a higher number of unsold or unrented units, impacting their income and the income of property owners. The very feel of entire communities, which usually come alive, with the arrival of Canadian snowbirds, is reportedly quieter, less vibrant, and noticeably changed. And worryingly for Arizona, this isn't necessarily being seen as a temporary phase. Reports suggest a growing number of Canadians, influenced by factors like the exchange rate, the rising cost of living in popular U.S. destinations, or simply evolving travel preferences, are opting to spend their winters vacationing domestically within Canada or exploring alternative, potentially cheaper destinations like Mexico or Portugal, which offer similar warm climates at a potentially lower cost. For Arizona, this represents a direct hit, not just to its vital winter tourism industry, but to the established identity and economic model of many of its southern communities. The significant worry, as this trend potentially becomes the new normal, is that entire pockets of the state that relied on the snowbird economy might shrink, facing declining property values, significant challenges for small businesses that catered to this market, and a strain on the workforce that depended on those seasonal dollars. This shift isn't just seasonal in its timing. Its potential long-term consequences are seen as seismic for the state's winter economy. Michigan, for decades, it was a familiar and integral part of the rhythm of life along the US-Canada border, particularly for communities in Michigan adjacent to Ontario. A short drive across the bridge or through the tunnel, a quick stop for a tank of gas, often cheaper in the US, perhaps a shopping spree at an outlet mall or a visit to a favorite restaurant, and then back home by dinner. This cross-border weekend ritual, multiplied by thousands of individuals and families, represented a significant economic boost for Michigan border towns. But today, the bridges are reportedly quieter. The border towns feel somewhat forgotten by their northern neighbors, and Michigan, perhaps more acutely than many other states, is reportedly starting to feel a distinct economic chill stemming from the north. The roads leading to the border crossings like the Ambassador Bridge connecting Detroit to Windsor, or the Blue Water Bridge linking Port Huron to Sarnia, used to hum with a constant flow of traffic, a steady stream of cars carrying shoppers, families embarking on weekend trips, and larger caravans of snowbirds beginning their journey south for the winter. But lately, these major arteries are reportedly noticeably less congested, at times even eerily quiet, indicating a significant change in cross-border movement. Welcome to Michigan, where the discernible disappearance of Canadian tourists and day trippers is leaving an unmistakable void in the economies of its border communities and beyond. For decades, the state has thrived significantly on this cross-border travel, particularly from the densely populated province of Ontario, located just a short drive or bridge crossing away. But now, that vital connection seems less traveled, as if the bridge itself has become a less porous barrier. In 2025, various travel reports and analyses of border crossing data reportedly show a significant and worrying drop in Canadian vehicle crossings into Michigan compared to pre-pandemic highs. Some major ports of entry are reportedly experiencing declines of over 30%, representing hundreds of thousands of fewer individual crossings annually. And when fewer Canadians cross that line into Michigan, the economic ripple effect for the adjacent communities is immediate and profound. You would be shocked by the depth of dependency that many businesses in Michigan's border towns have on this consistent cross-border traffic. Cities like Detroit, Port Huron, and Sault Ste. Marie, as well as smaller towns in between, aren't just points of entry. They are economic lifelines for thousands of small businesses, including gas stations that are pumping less fuel, retail stores and malls that were once packed with Canadian shoppers, seeking variety or lower prices now echoing with emptiness, and restaurants and service providers that relied on this steady flow of customers. Even casinos in Michigan, which used to face fierce competition from gaming venues just across the river in Windsor, Ontario, are reportedly seeing a reduction in Canadian patrons, impacting their revenue. Furthermore, local services in these areas are also feeling it. Pharmacies, dental offices, and even grocery stores that once catered to cross-border visitors seeking specific products or services have reportedly started cutting hours, or in some cases, closing locations entirely, due to reduced demand. That quick trip across for cheaper goods, a specific shopping experience, or a unique meal in Michigan is simply no longer happening with the frequency it used to. The cause of this decline isn't attributed to just one single factor. While exchange rates and the relative strength of the US and Canadian dollars have always played a part in influencing cross-border shopping and travel habits, the current trend seems indicative of a bigger, potentially more permanent shift underway. Analysts suggest that a new generation of Canadians may have different travel priorities, potentially opting to vacation domestically within Canada, or explore more distant international destinations that they perceive as offering more value or different experiences. Meanwhile, Michigan is left watching its most reliable and geographically convenient customer base fade, prompting serious questions for economic planners and business owners. The critical question now facing Michigan isn't just whether these Canadian visitors will eventually return in their previous numbers, but whether the state's border economies can survive and adapt if they don't, highlighting a significant economic vulnerability. Drive along the highways leading towards Ohio from the north, and you might notice something different. Parking lots at attractions, shopping centers, and hotels that were once reliably packed, with cars bearing Ontario license plates, now sit noticeably half-empty. Downtown areas in cities relatively close to the border that used to buzz with activity, particularly on long weekends or during peak tourist seasons, are now quieter than expected. Walk into some local stores, particularly in northern Ohio, and if you talk to the owners or staff, you'll likely hear the common lament: it's been slower than usual. But for those tracking the data, the numbers say more than just slow. This is Ohio, and like its neighbor to the north, Michigan, it is reportedly feeling the significant fallout from Canada's vanishing tourists, sharing a border with Ontario across Lake Erie and located just a few hours' drive from major Canadian population centers like Toronto, Ohio has long served as a low-key but consistent favorite destination for Canadian travelers. Attractions ranging from the thrilling roller coasters of Cedar Point Amusement Park and the cultural draws of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in Cleveland to the recreational opportunities offered by Lake Erie's islands and coastal areas used to reliably draw thousands of Canadian visitors each year, particularly for weekend trips and summer vacations. But now, according to reports from regional tourism boards and state data, Canadian visitation to Ohio is reportedly down significantly, potentially more than 25% compared to average numbers from before 2020. This means that many of the weekend business booms that local economies had come to depend on have simply stopped occurring with the same frequency and intensity. Hotels in cities located near the lake and within a few hours' drive of the border, such as Toledo, Sandusky, and even further south towards Columbus, are reportedly offering deeper discounts and more aggressive promotions to try and fill rooms that would have previously been booked by Canadian visitors. Restaurant revenues in border-adjacent towns and tourist areas have reportedly dropped as fewer Canadians are coming for meals. Local attractions, including smaller museums, seasonal fairs and festivals, and lakefront resorts, are reportedly reporting a consistent trend. They are seeing fewer Canadians, a lot fewer than they expected or needed. But the impact of this decline in Canadian tourism isn't confined solely to the traditional travel and hospitality industries. Shopping centres and outlet malls, particularly those located along major routes from the border that once saw buses filled with Canadian bargain hunters seeking lower prices on goods, are reportedly facing significant challenges, in some cases, leading to store closures or reduced hours. Furthermore, with fewer Canadians fueling weekend commerce and contributing to the overall economic activity in northern Ohio, state and local sales tax revenue in certain counties has reportedly taken a noticeable dip. While the impact might seem subtle now to those not directly involved in tourism, over the long term, a sustained decrease in tax revenue could mean less funding available for essential local services, maintenance of public infrastructure, and even support for schools and community programs. And here's the broader question this situation highlights. Why does this matter to the rest of the state, or even the country? Because Ohio, like many states that don't always market themselves as prime international destinations, quietly relies on this type of consistent regional tourism for economic stability in specific areas. And when that consistency disappears, the economic cracks begin to appear, first locally, but with potential for wider implications. The state of Washington is globally renowned for its stunning natural beauty, encompassing majestic mountains, lush evergreen forests, and a beautiful coastline dotted with islands. Its cities, particularly Seattle, are known for their vibrant culture, strong coffee scene, and technological innovation. But walk through certain areas of Washington, particularly those closest to the Canadian border, and while the mountains are still stunning and the coffee is still strong, that familiar, steady hum of out-of-towners with Canadian accents seems diminished. And no, according to reports, it's not just the seasonal ebb and flow of tourism, it's indicative of something deeper. Welcome to Washington, where the slowdown in Canadian tourism is reportedly hitting harder and having a more significant and tangible economic impact than many outside the affected regions fully realize. For years, towns located directly on or near the US-Canada border in Washington, such as Bellingham and Blaine, thrived significantly off of the steady, predictable, cross-border traffic from British Columbia, particularly the Greater Vancouver area, located just a short drive away. Canadians frequently cross the border for a variety of reasons. Shopping for goods perceived as cheaper or more readily available in the US, filling up their gas tanks, buying groceries, and embarking on weekend getaways to explore the cultural attractions of Seattle or the natural beauty of the San Juan Islands and the Olympic Peninsula. But in 2025, that once reliable flow of cross-border visitors has reportedly slowed to a trickle in comparison to previous years. Data from U.S. Customs and Border Protection, or regional analyses, reportedly show cross-border vehicle traffic at some points of entry in Washington is down significantly, potentially by nearly 40% compared to early 2020 levels, representing a Massive decrease in the number of individuals crossing for shopping, leisure, and visits. And when fewer people cross that line, the economic fallout for the adjacent communities and businesses is immediate, direct, and painful. You would be shocked to learn just how many Washington retailers, particularly those in Whatcom County where Bellingham is located, built their entire business models and relied heavily on the consistent patronage of Canadian customers. Now parking. Lots at shopping centres and retail outlets that were once reliably filled with Canadian cars sit empty. Mall hours are reportedly being reduced due to lack of foot traffic. Even larger chain stores that aggressively sought locations in these border areas in the past are reportedly seeing reduced sales and potentially pulling out or downsizing operations due to the decline in cross-border shoppers. And the impact isn't just about shopping. Airlines operating out of airports like Seattle-Tacoma International Airport, SeaTac, are reportedly seeing a sharp decline in flights originating from or carrying passengers from Vancouver-based travelers, impacting their routes, capacity management, and potentially leading to price adjustments for remaining passengers. What happens to businesses when their most convenient, reliable, and numerous group of customers quietly begins to disappear over time? Washington State, particularly its border regions and major cities that benefited from Canadian visitors, is currently finding out, and for many, the economic reality is not pretty, highlighting a significant economic dependency that is now being acutely felt as the cross-border flow diminishes. Illinois. It's the kind of economic impact that doesn't always hit with the suddenness of a factory closure or a natural disaster. Instead, it often begins subtly, almost imperceptibly. At first, you might just notice slightly fewer out-of-state cars on the road, or perhaps a hotel lobby that feels a bit less crowded than usual during peak season. Eventually, this trickle-down effect accumulates, and larger events like festivals or conventions start reporting thinner crowds. This is the process that is reportedly unfolding in Illinois, a state that you might not immediately or intuitively link to significant Canadian tourism in the same way you would Florida or New York, but where the numbers reveal a surprising and concerning trend. You might not immediately associate this major Midwestern hub, renowned for its agricultural output, industrial centers, and the global city of Chicago, directly with Canadian tourism, in the same way you would states closer to the border. However, Chicago alone has historically been a significant and popular destination for Canadian travelers, drawn by its status as a major cultural center, its world-class museums, theater scene, dining options, and its role as a key hub for business and conventions, facilitated by direct flight connections from major Canadian cities. But according to various reports and analyses in 2025, the Canadian visitation rate to Illinois is reportedly down significantly, potentially by nearly 30% compared to previous years, and the cumulative effects of this decline are reportedly starting to stack up and become noticeable across various sectors of the state's economy. Hotels in Chicago and other cities in Illinois that cater to business and leisure travelers are reportedly reporting softer bookings, with lower occupancy rates than they would expect, particularly impacting midweek business travel and weekend leisure stays. Museums and attractions that are major draws for visitors, such as Navy Pier, the Art Institute of Chicago, and others, are reportedly having to push heavier promotions and discounts to attract visitors and make up for the shortfall in their expected attendance, partly attributable to fewer international visitors, including Canadians. Even McCormick Place, one of the largest convention centers in North America, a major engine for Chicago's economy, is reportedly seeing a reduction in international attendance at the large conferences and trade shows it hosts, with a noticeable drop specifically in Canadian delegates who would typically attend events relevant to their industries. You would be surprised by how many small businesses in Chicago, from independent cafes and tourist districts to boutiques and gift shops, relied on that subtle but steady flow of foreign visitors, including Canadians, for a portion of their daily revenue. And the impact isn't confined solely to the metropolitan area of Chicago. Cities in other parts of Illinois, such as Rockford, located closer to the Wisconsin border but still within driving range for some Canadians, and Peoria, are reportedly losing out on regional Canadian road trips or travelers passing through, who would have previously stopped, stayed overnight, or spent money in local businesses. Illinois is certainly not on the verge of economic collapse due to this trend, but it is undeniably catching cold from the north, feeling the economic effects of a reduced flow of Canadian visitors. And the longer this economic chill lingers, the more it is likely to spread its impact across various sectors of the state's diverse economy. The reported decline in Canadian tourism across these 10 states in 2025 highlights a significant economic vulnerability for regions that had come to depend heavily on this specific demographic. It underscores that international tourism is not a monolithic entity, but is composed of distinct markets, each with its own sensitivities to economic factors, exchange rates, competing destinations, and evolving travel preferences. For the affected states, this trend presents immediate challenges for businesses, potentially impacting employment and reducing local tax revenues. In the longer term, it reveals the importance of diversifying tourism markets and economic bases, prompting a necessary re-evaluation of strategies to attract and retain visitors in a global travel landscape that is constantly shifting. The story of the vanishing Canadian tourist is more than just a tale of empty hotel rooms. It's a narrative about the interconnectedness of economies and the tangible impact of external factors on local livelihoods across the United States.